Headline: 4-year-old homeless girl beaten daily until a billionaire witnessed it. You won't believe what he did. Leave a rating from 0 to 10 for my story in the comments. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of the impact echoed through the streets of downtown Chicago like a gunshot in the afternoon silence. The 4-year-old girl, who looked barely 2 due to severe malnutrition, was thrown against the cold concrete wall with a force that made passers-by stop and stare in horror. Her tattered and dirty clothes barely covered her frail body, and her big eyes reflected a deep primal fear. The drunken man who had just assaulted her staggered back, his eyes bloodshot with hate and alcohol. His words came out in disjointed shouts as he pointed an accusing finger at the child huddled on the ground. "You little brat! Because of you, my life is hell! You and all these dirty kids infesting our streets!" The girl didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears only attracted more violence. Instead, she remained still as a wounded animal, waiting for the storm to pass. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and a red mark began to form on her left arm where she had hit the wall. From inside, a black Maybach cruising down the busy avenue, a pair of eyes watched the whole scene with growing indignation. The 30-year-old billionaire, Silas Blackwood, who had amassed a fortune through savvy investments in the stock market, felt something long dormant stir in his chest. His face, worthy of a movie star with striking features and piercing eyes, tightened into an expression of contained fury. It had been 2 years since he had shielded his heart against any strong emotions, ever since he lost his wife in an accident that still haunted him in the silent hours of the night. Without hesitation, he ordered the driver to stop the vehicle. He stepped out with determined strides, his imposing height and athletic build causing other passers-by to step back respectfully. The bespoke suit contrasted sharply with the dilapidated urban setting around him. "Hey!" His voice cut through the air with the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms full of executives. "Get away from that child immediately!" The drunken man turned, initially intimidated by the stranger's imposing presence, but soon his drunkenness took over. "Who do you think you are, you fancy suit jerk? This ain't your business." "I'm making it my business," replied Silas, positioning himself between the aggressor and the girl. His voice was calm, but loaded with a veiled threat that made the man recoil instinctively. For a few tense moments, the two men stared each other down. Silas could smell the strong odor of cheap liquor and sour sweat emanating from the aggressor, mixed with the characteristic smell of someone who had gone days without bathing. His nostrils twitched slightly, but he didn't back down an inch. Finally, perhaps realizing that he had no chance against a visibly stronger and sober man, the drunk muttered some obscenities and stumbled away, disappearing among the hurried pedestrians of the afternoon. Silas turned immediately to check on the child, but when his eyes searched the spot where she had fallen, he found only the empty asphalt and some dark stains that could have been blood or simply accumulated dirt. "Where did she go?" he murmured to himself, looking frantically around. The girl had vanished into thin air, taking advantage of the brief standoff between the two men to slink into the shadows of the abandoned buildings that dotted that decaying area of the city. Her ability to become invisible had been developed over months of survival on the hostile streets. Hidden behind a stinking dumpster, she watched the man in the suit looking for her. Her small heart beat erratically, not with gratitude, but with terror. Rich men, men in fancy clothes, meant danger in her limited world. They meant pain, humiliation, and worse things that her childish mind couldn't yet name. Silas remained on the sidewalk for almost 20 minutes, questioning people passing by, offering money for information about the child. But the answers were always the same: shrugs, evasive looks, quick denials before hurrying away. When he finally returned to his car, a strange sensation had settled in his chest. It was as if a part of himself that had been dead for 2 years had just awakened, and now pulsed with an urgent and inexplicable need to find that girl again. "Home, Mr. Blackwood?" asked the driver, watching his boss's troubled expression in the rearview mirror. "Yes," he replied automatically, but his eyes remained glued to the window, scanning every shadow, every alley, every small figure that could be her. What he didn't know was that this would be just the first of many afternoons he would spend wandering those streets. He also didn't know that his stepmother, Priscilla, who managed much of his family's business with an iron fist, had already been informed by her contacts about this strange behavior of her stepson. And even less did he know that, from a distance, calculating eyes watched the whole scene with growing interest, already plotting ways to turn this nascent obsession into a profit opportunity. The girl finally emerged from her hiding place when the streets emptied and the darkness offered additional protection. But that man's face had been etched into her memory, along with a confusion of feelings that she couldn't understand. For the first time in a long time, someone had tried to protect her, but her life experience told her that this was impossible. As she walked through the deserted streets towards the place where she knew she would find a plate of spoiled food, a single question echoed in her childish mind. Why had that man risked getting involved? 3 weeks had passed since the first encounter, and Silas's behavior began to seriously worry his family. Every afternoon, promptly at 3 o'clock, he cancelled important appointments and drove personally to that degraded area of the city, traversing the same streets with a determination that bordered on obsession. The cruel stepmother watched this routine with growing interest from her office on the 40th floor of the family's corporate building. Her calculating eyes gleamed as she flipped through detailed reports on her stepson's activities, provided by private detectives she had hired discreetly. "Interesting," she murmured to herself, adjusting her impeccable business suit as she studied photographs that showed Silas talking to homeless people, handing out money, and asking questions about a specific child. Very interesting indeed. Her sharp mind, forged by decades navigating the most ruthless circles of the corporate world, was already beginning to draw up plans. If she could prove that her stepson was mentally unstable, wasting company time and resources on this foolish search, she could finally take complete control of the family empire she had coveted for years. Meanwhile, on the dusty streets, Silas parked his car in the same spot where he had witnessed the assault. His attire had gradually changed over the weeks. The Italian suits had given way to simpler clothes in an attempt to blend in better with the local environment and not scare off potential informants. "You're back," said a hoarse voice behind him. He turned and found an elderly woman, approximately 70 years old, who sold wilted flowers on a nearby corner. Her tired eyes studied the man with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "Do you know her? The little girl who was assaulted here?" The flower seller hesitated, her arthritic hands nervously adjusting the dried stems. "Maybe. Depends on how much that information is worth." Silas took out some bills from his wallet, more than enough to buy the woman's entire stock. "Is she okay? I need to know if she's safe." "Safe?" The woman laughed bitterly, tucking the money into the torn pockets of her skirt. "No child is safe around here, mister. Especially not her." "What do you mean by that?" But before the woman could answer, an imposing figure emerged from the shadows of an abandoned building. It was a woman in her 50s, with eyes as hard as stone and a smile that didn't even come close to being warm. Her clothing, though simple, was impeccably clean and pressed, contrasting with the surroundings. "Trouble, Mama Rose?" asked the newcomer, her voice carrying a subtle authority that made the flower seller pale visibly. "No, Mum. No trouble. The gentleman here was just asking about flowers," stammered the old woman, gathering her belongings with obvious haste. Silas noticed the immediate change in the woman's behavior and turned his attention to the new character. There was something about her that bothered him deeply, a predatory energy barely disguised by polite manners. "And you are?" asked the perverse woman, extending a hand that Silas hesitated to shake. Someone concerned about the welfare of the children in this area, he replied cautiously, avoiding giving his name. Oh, how noble, she said, and this time her smile was genuine, but in a way that made Silas's skin crawl. We always need more generous people around here. There was something in the way she pronounced the word generous that sounded like a veiled threat. Silas began to slowly back away towards his car, but the woman took a step forward. Actually, perhaps you can help me with a problem. I take care of several needy children in this area. I always need donations to keep them fed and sheltered. What kind of care? He asked, his business instincts detecting something fundamentally wrong with the situation. The care that abandoned children need, of course. Food, shelter, protection. She paused, her eyes studying his reaction. The girl you've been asking about, for example. She's under my care. Silas's heart raced. Is she okay? Can I see her? Well, that would depend on your generosity. Taking care of children is expensive, you know, especially children who come to me in delicate condition. The way she paused between words, as if savoring each syllable, made his stomach clench. There was something deeply wrong here, but she had information about the girl that he desperately needed. How much? He asked directly, deciding to cut to the chase. The perverse woman smiled more broadly. Ah, I see you're a practical man. I like that. How about we discuss this in a more private location, tomorrow afternoon, same time. I know a place where we can talk without interruptions. Before he could answer, she turned away with determined strides, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys of the neighborhood. The flower seller had already vanished too, leaving only a few wilted petals on the ground as evidence of her presence. Silas remained standing for several minutes, processing the encounter. Every fiber of his being screamed that he was entering dangerous territory, but the possibility of finding the girl was too strong to resist. As he drove back home, he didn't notice the discreet car following him at a respectful distance. He also didn't notice the small and fragile figure watching him from a second-floor window of a seemingly abandoned building. Her big eyes filled with a mixture of recognition and terror. The girl had learned to identify the cars that frequented her territory, and she had learned to fear, especially when outsiders began asking questions about her. In her limited experience, this always meant that something very bad was about to happen. That night, in his silent mansion, Silas couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty hallways, often stopping in front of the portrait of his late wife, Evelyn. Her gentle eyes seemed to question him about this growing obsession, but he didn't know how to explain even to himself what he was feeling. Why her? He whispered to the photograph. Why can't I stop thinking about her? The answer came in the form of a vivid memory. Evelyn, weeks before the accident, talking about her dream of helping abandoned children. She always said she wanted to make a difference in the life of at least one child, but death took her before she could fulfill that wish. Was his subconscious trying to honor her memory through this search? Or was there something deeper going on, something he wasn't yet ready to admit? On the other side of the city, in a building that looked abandoned from the outside, but functioned as a maze of small rooms on the inside, the girl huddled in the corner of a thin and dirty mattress. Her ribs were visible through her pale skin, and her small hands trembled not only from the cold, but from fear. She had overheard the conversation between the perverse woman and other older children. There was a rich man asking questions about her. This could only mean one thing in her experience: more pain, more humiliation, more reasons to wish she were invisible. She closed her eyes tightly and tried to remember the gentle face that sometimes visited her dreams, a woman with a warm smile who used to give her food when no one was watching. But that memory was becoming increasingly vague, replaced by cruel faces and threatening voices. On the other side of the thin wall, she could hear the perverse woman talking on the phone, her voice low but charged with barely contained excitement. The words billionaire, money, and opportunity reached the girl's ears like fragments of a nightmare. She didn't fully understand what they meant, but her childish intuition screamed danger. Something was changing, and in her experience, changes always made her life even worse. The arranged meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of downtown Chicago, a place where the echo of one's own footsteps sounded threatening. Silas arrived promptly, his nerves on high alert. He had left detailed instructions with his lawyer about his whereabouts, a precaution that his experience in business had taught him to take. The perverse woman was already waiting for him, sitting in an old wooden chair, her hands crossed in her lap, in a pose that tried to appear casual but couldn't completely hide the tension in her shoulders. Next to her was a worn leather briefcase, filled with documents that she claimed were guardianship papers for the children under her care. Punctual. "I like that in a businessman," she said, gesturing for him to sit in a chair similar to hers. "Shows seriousness." "Where's the girl?" He went straight to the point, refusing to sit down. His muscles were tense, ready to react to the first sign of danger. Straight to the point, too. Admirable. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a blurry photograph, clearly taken at a distance, without the subject's knowledge. "This is her. She came to me a few months ago in deplorable condition. Malnourished, traumatized, unable to speak for weeks." Silas took the photograph with hands that trembled slightly. It was her, without a doubt. Even through the grainy image, he could recognize those big, haunted eyes, the hunched posture of someone who had learned to occupy the smallest possible space in the world. "How can I be sure she's safe?" he asked, returning the photo. "Because Mr." She paused, waiting for him to provide his name. "Just tell me how she is." The woman smiled, clearly irritated by his refusal to identify himself, but decided to continue. "She's being fed, sheltered, protected from the dangerous elements of the street. But, as I mentioned yesterday, taking care of a child costs money, especially one with her special needs." "What kind of special needs?" "Severe trauma, communication difficulties, panic episodes when exposed to certain situations. Requires intensive care." The way she pronounced the word intensive made his stomach clench. "How much?" $5,000 a month. For food, shelter, medical care when necessary. The amount was absurdly high for the basic care she described, but Silas knew he wasn't there to negotiate logic. He was there for something he couldn't rationally explain. "And in return?" "In return, the girl continues to be well cared for. And you can have the peace of mind knowing that your concern is being properly addressed." There was something fundamentally wrong with this transaction, but he couldn't identify exactly what. "I want to see her first." "Ah," the woman sighed dramatically. "That would be complicated. As I mentioned, she has panic episodes with strangers, especially men in fancy clothes." "Why men in fancy clothes?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Previous traumatic experiences. Some of the elements that hurt her on the streets wore expensive clothes. The answer sounded rehearsed, but there was a glimmer of truth that he could detect. "Then how can I be sure the money is actually being used to take care of her?" "You have my word. Your word means nothing to me. I don't know you." The woman's eyes flashed with poorly disguised irritation. "Very well. How about this? Pay the first month up front, and in 1 week I'll arrange a controlled meeting. At a distance, where she can see you but not feel threatened." Silas considered the proposal. It was risky, but it seemed to be his only option to verify whether the girl was really under this woman's care. 1 week, he agreed, taking out an envelope he had prepared. "But if I find out you're lying, if the girl isn't being well treated—" "You'll do what?" she asked. a note of defiance in her voice. He stared directly at her, his intimidating presence filling the space between them. "I'll make sure your operation, whatever it really is, comes to an end." The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. The perverse woman took the envelope, quickly checked the contents, and put it in the briefcase with calculated movements. 1 week then, same place, same time. As Silas drove back, his mind worked frantically. There was something deeply wrong with that situation, but he couldn't identify exactly what. The woman knew too much about specific traumas, talked about childcare in a way that sounded more like a business than genuine compassion. He decided to hire an independent private investigator, someone who had no connections to his family or company. He needed to know exactly who he was dealing with before delving further into this situation. Meanwhile, in the abandoned building where the girl lived, a disturbing scene was unfolding. The perverse woman had returned in visibly better spirits, doling out instructions to the other older kids who functioned as her assistants. "The fish took the bait," she said to a boy of about 12, who clearly occupied a trusted position in her twisted hierarchy. "Now we need to make sure our little star is presentable for the next meet." The girl, hidden behind a pile of old crates, heard everything with her heart pounding erratically. She didn't fully understand the words, but the woman's tone was familiar to her. It was the same tone she used when planning something that would result in pain for her. "What if she doesn't cooperate?" asked the boy. "She will cooperate." They all cooperate, eventually. That night the girl was moved to a different room, a little smaller but visibly cleaner than her previous accommodation. There was even a blanket that didn't smell of mildew and a plate of food that seemed to have been prepared the same day. She ate slowly, wary of the sudden improvement in her conditions. In her limited experience, good things always came with a very high price, and usually that price involved pain. Through the thin wall, she could hear the perverse woman talking on the phone again. The words long-term investment and growth potential reached her ears, mixed with numbers that sounded like a lot of money. She didn't know that she was becoming the center of a game far more complex than she could imagine. She didn't know that miles away, Silas couldn't sleep thinking about her. And she certainly didn't know that Priscilla had found out about the mysterious payments and was already plotting a way to use that information for her own purposes. The only thing she knew for sure was that her life was about to change again. And in her experience, changes always meant more suffering. She closed her eyes and tried to remember that kind woman who sometimes appeared in her dreams, the one who gave her food secretly and spoke in a soft voice. But the image was increasingly distant, replaced by the harsh reality of her current existence. Somewhere in the city, clocks struck midnight, and a week of waiting began to count down, full of dangers that none of those involved could fully predict. But there was something the girl didn't know, something that would change everything. In a locked drawer in Silas's mansion, kept along with other precious belongings of his late wife Evelyn, there was a photograph that she would immediately recognize if she could see it. It was the image of the kind woman from her dreams, smiling warmly at the camera, wearing a volunteer apron from a local charity organization. The connection was there, waiting to be discovered, like an emotional time bomb that would explode at the right moment, changing the destiny of everyone involved in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The private investigator that Silas hired was a man in his 60s, a former cop with 3 decades of experience in complex cases. His methods were discreet but effective, and in just 4 days he had already gathered disturbing information about the woman who claimed to care for the girl. "Her real name is different from what she told you," informed the investigator during a private meeting in Silas's private office. "She has an extensive history of involvement with questionable activities related to vulnerable children." Silas felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What kind of activities?" "Exploitation of minors for forced begging. She operates a network where children are forced to work on the streets and hand over all the money collected." The conditions where they live are deplorable. Silas's hands clenched into fists on the mahogany desk. And the authorities, why is she still operating? She's clever. She moves the children constantly, has informants throughout the area, and whenever an investigation arises, the evidence simply disappears. The investigator paused, studying his client's reaction. There's something else you need to know. What? She doesn't work alone. She has connections with influential people, people who protect her operation in exchange for a percentage of the profits. Silas got up from his chair, walking to the window that offered a view of the city stretching out below. What kind of people? I'm still investigating, but I can guarantee one thing. She's found out about your interest in the specific girl and is planning to use that as a long-term income stream. You're not just a client to her, you're an investment. At that moment, Silas's secretary knocked on the door, interrupting the conversation. Sir, your stepmother is here. She says it's urgent. Silas exchanged a worried look with the investigator. Can you wait in the next room? We're not finished our conversation. As soon as the investigator left, the cruel stepmother Priscilla entered with determined steps, her heels echoing on the marble floor like war drums. Her face was composed in an expression of feigned concern, but her eyes gleamed with barely disguised triumph. We need to talk about your recent behavior, she said without preamble, placing a folder on the desk. I have reports that you've been making substantial payments to people of dubious reputation. My personal expenses are none of your business, he replied coldly. They are when they affect the reputation of the family and the company. She opened the folder, revealing photographs taken from a distance that showed him talking to homeless people, handing out money, visiting degraded areas of the city. The shareholders are starting to ask questions. Silas examined the photographs with growing irritation. You had me followed. I had an investigation done into why the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire is spending his time and money with this. She gestured vaguely towards the photos. It's the behavior of someone who's losing touch with reality, or of someone who still has a conscience. Conscience, she laughed bitterly. Conscience doesn't pay dividends, doesn't generate profits, doesn't maintain our position in the financial market. Your father built this fortune with discipline and focus, not with foolish sentimentality. The mention of his late father touched a sensitive nerve. Don't you dare talk about my father. Someone needs to talk about him, since you seem to have forgotten his teachings. She stood up, smoothing the skirt of her business suit. I'm calling a board meeting. Your mental sanity needs to be formally evaluated. The words came out like a gunshot in the tense silence of the room. Silas stared at her with a mixture of shock and growing fury. You have no authority to do that. I do when the well-being of the company is at risk. And a CEO who spends fortunes looking for imaginary children definitely represents a risk. The girl isn't imaginary. Prove it, she challenged. Present concrete evidence that this obsession has any basis in reality. Otherwise, the board will have no choice but to question your leadership ability. After her dramatic exit, Silas remained alone in the room for several minutes, processing the veiled threat. His stepmother had played her cards on the table, and now he was in a race against time to prove that his search had merit before she could convince the board that he was mentally unstable. The investigator returned, clearly having overheard part of the discussion through the door. Family troubles? Nothing that can't be resolved with solid evidence. Continue your investigation, but I have another job for you now. What do you need? I want you to document everything about this illegal operation. Photographs, testimonies, evidence that can be presented to the authorities when the time comes. Meanwhile, in the abandoned building, the girl was being prepared for the meeting that would take place in 3 days. The perverse woman had instructed the older children to take care of her in a special way. A bath with warm water, relatively clean clothes, even some extra food. But the girl wasn't fooled by the temporary improvements. She had learned that when people started treating her well suddenly, something much worse was coming. Her limited experience had taught her that kindness always came with a price. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked a boy of 4 who shared the room with her, one of the few children with whom she felt minimally safe to talk. "I think the boss is preparing you for something important," he whispered back. "I heard her saying that you're going to meet someone special." The word special made the girl's stomach clench with fear. In her experience, special people were always the ones who caused the most pain. That night, she had vivid nightmares with men in expensive suits, faceless faces that leaned over her with intentions that her childish mind couldn't fully comprehend, but that her instinct recognized as threatening. She woke up several times during the night, her heart pounding, cold sweat covering her pale skin. Every noise in the hallway made her shrink even further into the corner of the thin mattress, hoping that the door would remain closed. On the other side of the city, Silas also couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty hallways of his mansion, often stopping in front of the portrait of his wife, Evelyn. There was something nagging at his mind, a connection that he felt he was about to make, but that remained frustratingly out of reach. "What would you do?" he asked the photograph, as he had done so many times in the last 2 years. "How would you handle this situation?" The answer came in the form of a memory, his wife talking passionately about her volunteer work, about the children she attended in the poorest area of the city, about a specific girl who had touched her heart deeply. "There's a little girl," she had said once, "so small and scared. She reminds me of a wounded bird that needs special care." Silas's heart almost stopped. His wife had worked exactly in the area where he had found the girl. The dates coincided perfectly with the period before the accident. Was it possible that... He ran to the office and began frantically searching through his wife's belongings that he had stored. Agendas, notes, photographs of volunteer work, records of personal donations she made to local charities. And then he found it, a photograph of his wife kneeling next to a small and frail child, offering her a sandwich. The girl in the portrait was cleaner, less haunted, but there was no doubt they were the same big, sad eyes that had haunted him for weeks. His hands trembled as he turned the photograph over and found a note in his wife's delicate handwriting. "My little warrior, one day someone special will take care of you." The revelation hit him like an emotional avalanche. His wife had known the girl, had cared for her, had deeply cared about her well-being. And now, 2 years after her departure, he had found the same child in desperate circumstances. It wasn't coincidence, it was destiny. With renewed determination, he picked up the phone and dialed the investigator, even though it was 3 in the morning. "I need everything you can find out about the volunteer work my wife was doing 2 years ago, and I want you to speed up the investigation on the woman. We have less time than I thought." The race against time had officially begun, and now there was much more at stake than just saving a child. It was about honoring his wife's memory and fulfilling a promise she never had a chance to fulfill. The day of the second meeting arrived loaded with tension and conflicting expectations. Silas had spent the last few nights obsessively studying every document he had found about his wife's volunteer work, discovering details that made him question everything he thought he knew about the last months of her life. His wife had made detailed notes about various children, but the girl appeared with disturbing frequency in her records. "She doesn't talk about her family," said one entry. "Old scars suggest systematic abuse," said another. The most disturbing was the last note, made only a week before the accident. "I need to get her out of that place. Something terrible is happening." Armed with this new information, and with photographs that proved the connection between his wife and the girl, Silas arrived at the agreed location 15 minutes early. The abandoned warehouse seemed even more sinister in the harsh afternoon light, its broken windows like empty eyes, watching the arrival of the two protagonists of this increasingly complex drama. The perverse woman arrived punctually, but this time she wasn't alone. She brought with her a small and fragile figure who walked several steps behind, her head down, her shoulders curved in a defensive posture that spoke of months of psychological conditioning. When Silas saw the girl in person for the second time, he had to lean against the wall to keep from stumbling. She was visibly thinner than on the first occasion, if that was possible, and her clothes, though relatively clean, hung on her like rags on a scarecrow. "Here she is," announced the perverse woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "As promised. I kept my part of the deal." The girl raised her eyes briefly in the direction of Silas and immediately lowered them again, but in that fleeting moment of eye contact, he saw something that made him question everything. It wasn't just fear in her gaze. It was recognition. "She knows me," he murmured, more to himself than to the woman. "Knows you?" The perverse woman seemed genuinely surprised. "That's impossible. She never mentioned—" "Can I talk to her?" "From a distance." "As we agreed, she has episodes when men get too close." Silas ignored the warning and took 2 steps towards the girl. Immediately, she shrank behind the perverse woman, but didn't run away. It was a reaction of self-preservation, not of absolute terror. "Hi," he said gently, crouching down to get to her height. "Do you remember me?" The girl looked at him again, this time for longer. Her lips moved as if she was going to speak, but no sound came out. "It's okay," he continued, keeping his voice low and comforting. "I'm not going to hurt you. I would never do that." It was then that something extraordinary happened. The girl took a small step forward, moving slightly away from the protection offered by the perverse woman. Her big eyes studied Silas's face with an intensity disturbing for a 4-year-old child. "You knew the sandwich lady," she said suddenly, her voice small but clear. Silas's heart almost stopped. "The sandwich lady? She used to give me food secretly. She had eyes like yours." The perverse woman became visibly tense. "What lady are you talking about?" "My wife, Evelyn," replied Silas, without taking his eyes off the girl. "She volunteered in this area 2 years ago." That's an interesting coincidence," said the woman, but her voice carried a note of alarm. The girl continued talking as if a dam had broken in her mind. "She said that one day someone special would come to get me. She said I was going to be safe." Tears began to stream down Silas's face. "She really said that?" "Yes. But then she stopped coming, and the bad woman said she'd gone away forever." The reference to the bad woman made both Silas and the perverse woman tense, each for different reasons. There were clearly more people involved in this situation than either of them had anticipated. "What bad woman?" asked Silas. But before the girl could answer, the perverse woman intervened brusquely. "Enough talk for today. The child is getting agitated." "She doesn't seem agitated to me." "Trust my experience with her. It's best we stop here." Silas realized that he had discovered something that the perverse woman didn't want him to know. The connection between his wife and the girl was clearly deeper and more complicated than she had anticipated. "1 more week," he said, taking out another envelope. "But I want more time with her next time." "We'll see," replied the woman evasively, already pulling the girl towards the exit, but the girl turned around one last time before leaving. "Are you going to take me to a safe place?" she asked. The question echoed in the empty warehouse long after both had disappeared. As he drove back, Silas immediately called the investigator. "I need everything you can find out about what happened to my wife in the last weeks before the accident. Specifically about threats she may have received." "Threats? You think the accident may not have been accidental?" "I don't know what to think anymore. But my wife was planning to get the girl out of a dangerous situation. A week later, she was dead. I'll investigate immediately." Meanwhile, in the abandoned building, the girl was being severely reprimanded by the perverse woman. What's this story about the sandwich lady? Why have you never told me about her?" "You never asked," replied the girl with disarming honesty. "And what other things haven't you told me?" The girl was silent, instinctively knowing that she had said something wrong, but not understanding exactly what. "Listen closely," said the perverse woman, grabbing the girl's arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're not going to talk about that dead woman anymore. You're not going to talk about people you knew before. Understood?" The girl nodded quickly, tears forming in her eyes. "And if I find out you're lying, if you're making up stories to impress that rich man, you'll meet a punishment that will make you forget all the others." That night, the girl cried silently on her thin mattress. She didn't understand why talking about the kind lady had made the perverse woman so angry, but she knew she had made a serious mistake. On the other side of the city, Silas also couldn't sleep, but for completely different reasons. For the first time in 2 years, he felt he was on the right track to discovering the truth about his wife's death. And more importantly, he felt he was fulfilling a promise she never had a chance to fulfill. But in the back of his mind, a worried voice whispered that he had awakened dangerous forces, and that the girl could pay the price for his interference. The investigator worked throughout the early morning, scouring police records, medical reports, and testimonies about the accident. When the sun rose, he had discovered something that would completely change the course of the investigation. 3 witnesses to the original accident had changed their statements a week after the incident, and all had received substantial amounts of money from an anonymous source soon after. The accident that had changed Silas's life forever may not have been an accident after all, and if his wife had been silenced for trying to save the girl, it meant that both were in much greater danger than he had imagined. The web of lies and corruption was beginning to unravel, but each thread revealed showed that the situation was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had predicted. The board meeting took place on a rainy Friday, on the 42nd floor of the family's corporate building. Silas entered the boardroom with a leather briefcase under his arm, containing all the evidence he had gathered in recent days. His cruel stepmother, Priscilla, was already sitting at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by 6 board members she had carefully selected over the years. "Thank you for attending," she said, automatically taking control of the meeting. "As you know, I convened this extraordinary session due to concerns about the mental stability and questionable financial decisions of our current CEO." Silas sat down in silence, studying the faces around the table. Some were loyal to his father's memory, others clearly allied with his stepmother. The battle that would unfold in the next few minutes would determine not only his future, but also the fate of the girl. "Over the past 2 months," continued Priscilla, spreading photographs on the table, "he has spent significant amounts with individuals of dubious reputation, frequented dangerous areas of the city without any business justification, and neglected fundamental company responsibilities." One of the oldest board members, a man in his 70s who had been a close friend of Silas's father, picked up one of the photographs. "This is circumstantial evidence. What exactly is your accusation?" "Mental instability resulting in irrational decisions that endanger the family fortune," she replied without hesitation. "May I defend myself?" asked Silas calmly. "Of course. We want to hear your explanation for this erratic behavior." Silas opened his briefcase and took out the photograph he had found among his wife Evelyn's belongings, the one that showed her with the girl. "It all started when I found this among my late wife's personal documents." He passed the image around the table. "My wife was secretly caring for a child in a situation of extreme risk. Her personal records show that she was planning to formalize an adoption when the accident happened. That doesn't justify throwing money away on sentimental fantasies," replied Priscilla quickly. "These aren't fantasies," he said, taking more documents out of the briefcase. "I hired a professional investigator who uncovered a child exploitation ring operating in the area where my wife was volunteering. The child she was trying to save is one of the victims. A concerned murmur rippled through the room. The oldest board member leaned forward. What kind of ring? Children forced into begging, kept in deplorable conditions, moved constantly to avoid detection. He paused, letting the information sink in. And there is evidence that my wife was threatened for trying to interfere in this operation. Evidence? Asked another board member. 3 witnesses to the accident changed their statements a week after the incident, all receiving substantial payments from an anonymous source shortly thereafter. The silence that followed was tense and charged. Priscilla realized she was losing control of the narrative. Even if that's true, that doesn't justify obsessive behavior and irresponsible spending. It wasn't irresponsible spending, replied Silas firmly. It was investing in an investigation that can dismantle a criminal organization and honor my wife's memory, fulfilling her last wish. And how much does this investigation cost? Asked one of the board members allied with Priscilla. Less than 0.5% of what we spend annually on corporate marketing. An insignificant amount considering the potential positive social impact. The oldest board member cleared his throat. Assuming your suspicions are correct, what is your plan of action? Fully document the illegal activities, present evidence to the competent authorities, and ensure that the child and other victims are placed in safety. And then, establish a foundation in my wife's name to help other children in similar situations. Transform personal tragedy into lasting, positive social impact. The proposal sounded noble and well thought out. Several board members seemed genuinely impressed. Priscilla realized that her attempted coup was failing. That all sounds very beautiful, she said with barely disguised sarcasm. But how do we know this investigation isn't just an elaborate fantasy constructed to justify irrational behavior? Because I have proof, replied Silas, taking audio recordings from his briefcase. Recorded conversations with the woman who runs the operation, explicitly admitting that she exploits children and that she has connections with influential people who protect her activities. He played one of the most compromising recordings. The perverse woman's voice echoed through the boardroom, coldly describing how she cared for the children and mentioning her investors and business partners. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Even Priscilla's allies seemed disturbed by what they had heard. "Good God," murmured one of the board members. "This woman is talking about children as if they were merchandise." "Exactly," said Silas, "and my wife found this out. That's why she died." The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. Priscilla paled visibly. "Are you suggesting that your wife was murdered?" "I'm suggesting that the circumstances of her death deserve to be investigated further, especially considering that she was threatening the lucrative operation of dangerous people." The oldest board member stood up slowly. "I think we've heard enough. Far from showing mental instability, our CEO has demonstrated strategic thinking, careful planning, and a sense of social responsibility that honors both his family and our company." Other board members murmured agreement. Priscilla's attempted coup had turned into a public endorsement of Silas's actions. "I propose that we not only support this investigation," continued the board member, "but that we authorize additional resources to ensure it is conducted with maximum effectiveness." "I agree," said another board member, "and I propose that we consider legal action against anyone who interfered with the original accident investigation." Priscilla realized she had made a catastrophic mistake. Instead of discrediting her stepson, she had provided a platform for him to present compelling evidence of personal heroism and social responsibility. "The meeting is adjourned," she said abruptly, gathering her papers with jerky movements. "Actually," corrected the oldest board member, "I would like to propose a motion of confidence in our current CEO." The vote was unanimous, except for Priscilla's furious abstention. After the meeting, as the others left, the oldest board member approached Silas. "Your father would be proud," he said. "He always believed that wealth without social purpose was just greed in disguise." But while Silas savored this political victory, a very different scene unfolded on the other side of the city. The perverse woman had found out through her informants about the board meeting and the accusations that had been made. "He has recordings," she said on the phone to someone whose name she didn't mention. "He needs to be silenced before he causes more problems." "Like his wife was silenced?" asked a male voice on the other end of the line. "Exactly like his wife was silenced." The girl, hidden in a dark corner of the abandoned building, overheard fragments of the conversation and felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't fully understand the words, but the tone of threat was unmistakable. The man who had tried to help her, the man with the same gentle eyes as the sandwich lady, was in danger because of her. And this time, she knew she had to do something to warn him, even if it meant putting her own life at even greater risk. For the first time in months, the girl began to formulate an escape plan, not just to save herself, but to save the only person who had shown genuine concern for her well-being since the sandwich lady had disappeared from her life. Night was falling over the city, and with it a new phase of this complex story was about to begin. A phase where a 4-year-old child would become the key to unraveling a conspiracy much larger than anyone imagined. The girl's escape happened during the early hours of the morning, when the abandoned building was immersed in a silence that was only broken by the occasional snores of the adults who controlled her life. She had spent weeks observing movement patterns, memorizing when each door was locked, when the hallways were empty, when her absence might go unnoticed for the longest time. Her bare feet made no noise at all on the cold concrete floor as she moved like a shadow through the dark hallways. Her heart beat so hard that she feared someone could hear it, but the need to warn the man with the gentle eyes was stronger than her fear. She had managed to memorize the address that she had heard the perverse woman mention during a telephone conversation, something about the mansion in the upscale neighborhood, and numbers that her childish mind had stuck to like glue. She couldn't read, but numbers were universal, and she had seen enough signs on the streets to understand how to find places. The city in the early hours of the morning was a completely different place from the one she knew during the day. The streets were deserted, illuminated only by streetlights that created yellowish circles of safety in the darkness. She ran from one circle of light to another, as if playing a deadly game of hopscotch. It took almost 3 hours to cover the distance between the abandoned building and the neighborhood where Silas's mansion was located. Her feet were cut and bleeding when she finally reached the imposing gates of the property, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the urgency she felt. The electric gate was too high to climb, but she found a hole in the back fence, probably made by some small animal. She managed to squeeze through the opening, tearing her already battered clothes even further in the process. The mansion's garden was like a fantasy world to her. Soft grass under her wounded feet, flowers that exuded sweet fragrances, fountains of clean water that reflected the moonlight. For a moment, she completely forgot the reason for her presence there, fascinated by the beauty she had never imagined existed. But the memory of the threatening telephone conversation quickly brought her back to reality. She ran to the front door of the mansion and began banging with her small fists, the sound echoing through the silent morning. Inside the mansion, Silas had just fallen asleep after hours of planning the next steps of the investigation. The sound of knocking on the door awakened him instantly, all his alert instincts firing. Who would be knocking on his door at 4 in the morning? He quickly put on a robe and went down the marble stairs, turning on the security lights that illuminated the entire front garden. When he looked through the peephole and saw the small and fragile figure, he almost didn't believe his eyes. "How did you get here?" he asked, opening the door quickly and kneeling down to her height. The girl was visibly exhausted, her clothes torn, her feet bleeding, but her eyes shone with a determination he had never seen before. "They want to hurt you," she said. the words tumbling out in her urgency, like they hurt the sandwich lady. His blood ran cold. "What did you hear?" "The bad woman was talking on the phone. She said you have recordings and need to be silenced." She paused, trying to remember exactly the words. Like his wife was silenced. The confirmation that his wife had been murdered hit Silas like a punch to the stomach, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. After 2 years of questioning his sanity, he was finally sure that his suspicions were correct. "Come in," he said, carefully picking her up in his arms. "You're safe now." He carried her inside the mansion, straight to the brightly lit and cozy kitchen. Her feet were in worse condition than he had initially realized, deep cuts, some still bleeding, clear signs that she had walked miles barefoot on rough asphalt. "I'm going to take care of your wounds," he said, looking for a first aid kit. "Then you're going to tell me everything you heard." As he cleaned and bandaged the girl's feet with extreme care, she began to report fragments of the conversation she had witnessed. Her memory was impressively detailed for a 4-year-old child. She repeated names she had heard, numbers that seemed important, even the specific tone of voice that the perverse woman had used. "She talked about a big man who was going to make you have an accident," said the girl, wincing when he touched a particularly deep cut. "Like the sandwich lady's accident." "What else did she say?" "That it had to be quick, before you talked to more important people." The girl stopped, her big eyes fixed on his face. "Are you an important person?" "Some people think so," he replied gently. "But not as important as you, for running all the way here to warn me." For the first time since she had arrived, she smiled. A small and hesitant smile, but genuine. The sandwich lady said that good people take care of each other. She was right. After treating the girl's injuries, Silas immediately called the investigator, even though it was 5 in the morning. The urgency of the situation didn't allow for social niceties. "We need to speed everything up," he said as soon as the investigator answered. "They're planning to eliminate me, possibly today." "How do you know this?" "The child ran away to warn me. She overheard their conversation." "Jesus Christ. Where is she now?" "Here with me. And she's going to stay here until we resolve this." He looked at the girl, who had fallen asleep in the kitchen chair, exhausted by the effort of the escape. "I'm going to hire private security immediately." "Good idea, and I'm going to accelerate the delivery of all the evidence to the authorities. If something happens to you, at least the investigation will continue." While making arrangements for personal protection, Silas realized that he now had a much greater responsibility in his hands. It wasn't just his own life that was at risk. He had become the sole protector of a child who had risked everything to save him. He carried the sleeping girl to one of the guest rooms, carefully placing her on the king-size bed that was larger than any space where she had slept in her entire life. He covered her with silk sheets that cost more than many people earned in a month. But for her, the most important luxury was the feeling of safety. As he watched her sleep, his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? You've made a very serious mistake," said a male voice he didn't recognize. "Interfering in business that isn't yours has consequences." "Who is this?" "Someone who knew your wife very well before she decided to be a heroine." The voice paused, savoring the impact of the words. "She was a beautiful woman. Too bad she didn't know when to stop asking questions." The line went dead, leaving Silas with a racing heart and the certainty that the web of corruption was much more extensive than he had imagined. On the other side of the city, the perverse woman discovered the girl's escape and panicked. Her most valuable merchandise, the one that had become the center of an operation that could yield millions over the years, had simply disappeared. "Find her!" she ordered her subordinates. "And when you find her, make her pay for this betrayal." But what she didn't know was that the girl had done much more than simply escape. She had broken the chain of silence that kept the entire operation running, and now, for the first time in years, the victims had a protector with enough resources to fight their tormentors. The war had officially begun, and a 4-year-old child had fired the first shot by choosing courage over fear, hope over despair. As the city awoke to another seemingly normal day, 3 lives were irreversibly intertwined in a battle that would determine not only their future, but the fate of countless other children still trapped in the darkness. The morning brought with it a revelation that would completely change the course of the investigation. Silas was preparing breakfast for the girl, a completely new experience for him, who had never taken care of a child, when the investigator arrived with a somber expression on his face and a folder filled with disturbing documents. "I found the connection we were looking for," he said, spreading photographs on the kitchen table. "And it's much worse than we imagined." The girl was sitting on a high chair, slowly eating a plate of fresh fruit and watching the 2 men with growing curiosity. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe, but she still couldn't completely believe that this feeling would last. "What connection?" asked Silas, pouring fresh orange juice into a child's cup he had bought during the early morning. "Your stepmother isn't just an ambitious businesswoman," replied the investigator. "She's a silent partner in the child exploitation operation. The profits from the network are laundered through shell companies she controls." The glass slipped from Silas's hands, shattering on the marble floor. The girl shrank instinctively at the sound of the glass breaking, a reaction conditioned by months of associating loud noises with imminent violence. "It's okay, little one," he said gently, kneeling down to clean up the shards while processing the devastating information. "It was just an accident." "How did you find this out?" he asked the investigator, his voice loaded with shock and growing fury. "I followed the money. The payments you made to the perverse woman were deposited into an account that eventually transfers funds to an investment company controlled by your stepmother." He pointed to bank documents. "It wasn't a coincidence she called that meeting. She was trying to protect her own interests." The girl stopped eating and stared at Silas. Even without fully understanding the conversation, she could sense that something very serious was being discussed. "The bad woman has a sister," she said suddenly, her voice small but clear. Both men turned to her, surprised. "How do you know this?" "Did she mention anything else?" the millionaire asked. "I heard her talking on the phone. She said her sister was mad because the rich guy was asking too many questions." The girl paused, concentrating to recall the exact words. "She said her sister was going to take care of you like she took care of the sandwich lady." The investigator and the millionaire exchanged significant glances. The connection between the 2 women explained how the stepmother had obtained detailed information about the stepson's movements. "How old is your stepmother?" the investigator asked. 45. "And the woman running the child operation appears to be about 50, according to your descriptions." He quickly flipped through his files. "I need to check the family's birth records." At that moment, the intercom at the mansion rang. The millionaire checked the security cameras and saw 2 men in dark suits standing at the main gate. He didn't recognize them, and the tension of the situation made him immediately suspicious. "Don't open it," the investigator advised. "Let the security you hired handle it." But before they could take any action, the house phone rang. It was the cruel stepmother. "I need to speak with you immediately," she said, her voice more strained than he had ever heard it. "It's about the family's safety." "What safety?" "There are dangerous people who believe you have information that could harm them. They won't hesitate to use violence." The irony of the situation was not lost on the millionaire. His own stepmother, who was apparently part of the criminal organization, was now pretending to be concerned about his safety. "Where do you want us to meet?" "At the office, 1 o'clock. And come alone." "Why alone?" "Because these people have informants everywhere. If they realize you've brought protection, they might interpret that as a threat." After hanging up, the millionaire turned to the investigator. "It's a trap, obviously. But it might also be our only chance to get direct evidence of her involvement. What if it's an attempt to eliminate me? That's why you're not going alone, even if she asked you to. I'll be there, hidden, recording everything." The girl, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, suddenly stood up from the chair. "I want to come too." "Absolutely not," the millionaire replied immediately. "It's too dangerous. But I know the bad woman's sister's voice. If it's her, I can confirm it." The child's logic was surprisingly sound, but the risk was unacceptable. "You're staying here with the security guards. It's safer." "Nothing is safe," she said with a disturbing wisdom for her age. "The bad woman always finds where I am." The remark made the millionaire realize that keeping the girl at the mansion might not be as safe as he had imagined. If the criminal organization had the resources to bribe witnesses and stage convincing accidents, infiltrating a private property would not be impossible. "There's a place where you can be truly safe," the investigator said. "I know a trusted family that temporarily cares for children in at-risk situations. They're completely reliable and experienced with delicate cases." "No." The girl's reaction was immediate and intense. "I don't want to go with strangers. I want to stay with you." She clung to the millionaire's arm with a surprising strength for someone so small and fragile. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of despair, not of childish manipulation. "I promise it's only temporary," he said, kneeling to be at her height, "just until we resolve this dangerous situation." "Everyone always says it's temporary," she replied, her voice breaking. "The sandwich lady said she was coming back the next day. She never came back." The reference to his wife hit the millionaire like an emotional stab. He realized that, for the girl, he had become the only figure of stability in a world that constantly took away the important people. "I'm not like other people," he said firmly. "I always keep my promises." "Promise you'll come back for me?" "I promise." "Promise you won't let the bad woman take me back?" "I promise with my life." The intensity of his own promise surprised him. In just a few days, this child had become much more important to him than he had consciously admitted. 2 hours later, after leaving the girl with the investigator's trusted family, not without more tears and repeated promises, the millionaire headed to the meeting with his stepmother. His mind worked frantically, preparing for the confrontation that could define not only his future, but also the girl's fate. What he didn't know was that the cruel stepmother had spent the entire morning preparing her own trap. She had found out about the girl's escape through her sister, and now knew that her connection to the criminal network had been exposed. There was no other option but to eliminate all the evidence, including the inconvenient stepson who had become an existential threat to her profits. Meanwhile, in a safe location across town, the girl refused to eat or speak to her temporary caregivers. She sat by the window, watching every car that passed, waiting to see the man who had promised to come back for her. For the first time in her young life, she had something worth waiting for, and she was willing to wait as long as it took because she had finally found someone who kept his promises. But time was running out quickly, and forces much more powerful than anyone imagined were converging for a confrontation that would change everything forever. The clock read noon when the millionaire parked his car in the underground garage of the corporate building, unaware that hidden cameras were recording his every move and that his cruel stepmother awaited him 30 floors above with a plan she believed to be perfect. The moment of truth had arrived, and only one side would emerge alive from this encounter. The 42nd floor office had never seemed as sinister as it did that afternoon. The panoramic windows that normally offered a stunning view of the city now seemed like mirrors, reflecting the tension that hung in the air. The cruel stepmother sat behind the mahogany desk, her perfectly manicured hands crossed in a pose that attempted to convey calm, but which could not completely hide the nervousness in her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said when the millionaire entered, her voice sounding strangely formal for a family conversation. "Let's get straight to the point," he replied, remaining standing. "What danger did you want to warn me about?" "Sit down first." It's a long conversation. I prefer to stand, she sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Very well. I received information that you have become involved with very dangerous people during this obsessive search for the child. What kind of people? People who operate illegal businesses in that area of town. They believe you have evidence that could compromise them. She paused, studying his reaction. Evidence that could destroy an entire lucrative network. The millionaire realized she was testing how much he knew. And you found out about this how? I have contacts in various sectors of the city. When someone in our family becomes involved in dangerous situations, I find out. What kind of contacts? The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her mask of familial concern slipped, revealing something much colder underneath. Contacts necessary to protect our business interests. Interesting, he said, beginning to walk around the room. Because my investigator discovered something fascinating about these illegal businesses you mention. Your investigator? He discovered that the profits from this operation are laundered through shell companies, companies that, curiously, are registered in the names of people very close to our family. The silence that followed was charged with electricity. The cruel stepmother realized that she had completely underestimated her stepson's knowledge. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice trembled slightly. He also discovered something interesting about you and the woman running this operation, he continued, taking a photograph from the folder he was carrying. Birth certificates are public documents. Very easy to find when you know where to look. The photograph showed two certificates side by side, one in the name of the cruel stepmother, another in the name of the bad woman. The dates of birth and the parents' names were identical. Sisters, he said simply. The mask finally fell completely. The cruel stepmother's eyes became hard as stone, and a cold smile appeared on her lips. Very well. Since you've discovered all this, let's talk like adults. Let's. Your wife was a sentimental idiot who didn't know when to stop asking questions. She stood up, walking to one of the windows. She found out about our operation and threatened to expose everything. We had no choice. You murdered her. We protected our interests, just like we're doing now. At that moment, the office door opened and two large men entered. The millionaire immediately recognized them as the same ones who had appeared at his gate in the morning. You're not leaving this building alive, said the cruel stepmother with a coldness that made his blood run cold. Just like your wife didn't leave that car alive. People know where I am, he said, trying to buy time. Yes, they do. And they'll know that you threw yourself from the window of this office, unable to cope with the pressure of discovering that your beloved wife was involved with criminals. She smiled cruelly. A tragic version of the story, but convincing. What she didn't know was that the investigator was hidden in the office next door, recording every word through professional espionage equipment. She also didn't know that he had discreetly alerted the press about important developments in the case. Before you do this, the millionaire said, deciding to play his last card, there's something you should know about the child. What about her? She has a photographic memory. She remembers faces, voices, entire conversations. She can identify every person involved in this operation. The information made the cruel stepmother hesitate. If the child could really identify everyone involved, eliminating her would be much more complicated than staging an accident for the millionaire. Where is she? In a place where you'll never find her. We find all the children, eventually, said one of the men, speaking for the first time, but at that moment something unexpected happened. The office door opened again, and the company's most senior advisor entered, accompanied by 3 private security guards. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said calmly, but I received a very interesting call from a private investigator. The expression of shock on the cruel stepmother's face was absolute. How did you? Recordings are very convincing evidence, replied the advisor, gesturing to the security guards, who immediately positioned themselves between the henchman and the millionaire. especially when they include confessions of murder. "You don't understand," said the cruel stepmother, trying to regain control of the situation. "This operation generates millions in profits, money that benefits all of us." "Money dirtied by child exploitation," replied the advisor with disgust. "Your father must be rolling in his grave." In the following minutes, the situation unfolded quickly. The henchmen were disarmed and restrained. The cruel stepmother was arrested by private security until the authorities arrived, and the compromising recordings were delivered directly to the journalists waiting on the ground floor of the building. But the millionaire could only think of one thing. The girl was waiting for him, and he had promised to return. "I need to go," he said to the advisor. "Where to?" "To fulfill a promise to a very brave child." As he drove across the city towards the place where he had left the girl, the millionaire reflected on everything that had happened. His wife had been murdered for trying to save a child. Now, 2 years later, he had completed the mission she couldn't finish. When he arrived at the house where the girl was being cared for, he found her exactly where he had predicted, sitting by the window, watching the street. When she saw his car, she ran to the door before he could even park it completely. "You came back," she cried, jumping into his arms with a force that almost knocked him over. "I promised, didn't I?" he said, hugging her with an emotional intensity that surprised him. "The bad woman won't hurt me anymore? Never again. She can't hurt anyone anymore. And can I stay with you?" The question he had dreaded had finally arrived. Legally, she still didn't have proper documents. Socially, a single man adopting a child would face complex issues. Financially, there was no problem, but emotionally, looking into those big eyes full of hope and trust, there was only one possible answer. "If you want," he said, "you can stay with me forever." "I want to." That night, as the girl slept in a safe bed for the first time in her life, the millionaire found among his wife's belongings a letter she had started to write but never finished. The last lines read, "There's a special girl who needs a family. I know we'll find a way to help her. Love always finds a way." Finally, 2 years later, love had found its way, and a promise had been kept in the most unexpected way possible. But there were still secrets to be revealed, truths that would change everything he thought he knew about his wife, about the girl, and about the destiny that had united them in a way that went far beyond mere coincidence. The story was far from over, but for the first time in 2 years, there was genuine hope that the ending would be happy for everyone involved. 3 months had passed since the dismantling of the child exploitation ring, and life at the mansion had found a routine that neither of the two inhabitants had ever imagined possible. The girl, who now went by the temporary name of Violet, a choice of her own, inspired by a character from a children's book that the millionaire had read to her, was flourishing in ways that surprised even the specialized psychologists who were monitoring her development. Her physical scars had healed almost completely, but the most impressive transformations were emotional. The child who once cringed at the slightest noise now ran through the corridors of the mansion, screaming with joy, played in the garden with a freedom that seemed impossible just a few months ago, and most importantly of all, had returned to smile genuinely. "Daddy," she said one Saturday morning, using for the first time the word she had started to pronounce timidly in recent weeks. "Why do you get sad sometimes when you look at the sandwich lady's pictures?" The millionaire was preparing breakfast, a skill he had developed out of necessity and now practiced with pleasure, when the question caught him off guard. In recent months, Violet had shown an extraordinary emotional perception, capable of detecting nuances in his moods that he himself didn't always recognize. "It's not sadness exactly," he replied, sitting next to her at the kitchen table. "It's longing. Longing for someone very important who's no longer here." "But she is here," Violet said, pointing to her own chest. "In your heart, like my real mum is in my heart." The reference to her biological mother was rare, Violet rarely spoke about her life before the millionaire, as if those periods were chapters of a book she had decided to close forever. "Do you remember your real mother?" he asked gently. "A little. She had long hair and sang beautiful songs." Violet paused, fiddling distractedly with the cereal in her plate. "But you're my real dad now, right?" "Forever," he promised, kissing the top of her head. That afternoon, while Violet played in the garden with the dogs he had adopted specifically to keep her company, the millionaire received a call that would change everything again. "We have a problem," the investigator said, his voice strained. "I found something in your wife's personal files that you need to see immediately." "What kind of thing?" "I prefer to show you in person. Can I come to your house?" An hour later, the investigator arrived with a box of papers he had found in a storage unit that the millionaire's wife had secretly maintained. Inside were documents that told a story much more complex than anyone had imagined. "Your wife wasn't just doing volunteer work," the investigator explained, spreading papers across the office table. "She was conducting a personal investigation into the child exploitation ring for more than a year before her death." An investigation? Why didn't she tell me? "Because she discovered that the network had connections to people close to your family. She was trying to protect you." He pointed to a series of detailed notes. "Look at these dates. She started suspecting your stepmother 6 months before the accident." The millionaire examined the documents with growing astonishment. His wife had meticulously documented suspicious financial transactions, patterns of strange behavior, even photographs secretly taken of meetings between his stepmother and people she had identified as suspects. "There's more," continued the investigator, removing a separate folder. "She was specifically looking for a child. Violet. Not just Violet. She was looking for a child who had disappeared from the adoption system 2 years ago, a child she believed had been kidnapped by the network." The millionaire's heart raced. "What child?" The investigator took out a photograph and placed it on the table. It was an official adoption image, showing a baby girl of approximately 2 years old with big eyes and dark hair. Her original name was Elena Rodriguez. She was in a foster family when she disappeared during a supervised visit to the park. He paused, letting the information sink in. The foster family never saw her again. The case was closed as an unsolved kidnapping. "You think Violet?" "I think Violet is Elena Rodriguez." The revelation hit the millionaire like a lightning bolt. If Violet had been kidnapped from a family that loved her, that meant that somewhere there were people desperately looking for her for 2 years. "Where is that family now?" "That's where the situation gets complicated," replied the investigator. "The foster family fell apart after the disappearance. The couple divorced under the stress, but the foster mother never stopped looking. She's alive." "Yes, and when she finds out that we found Elena, Violet, she's going to want her daughter back." The millionaire stood up and walked to the window, watching Violet playing innocently in the garden. In just a few months, she had become the center of his universe, the reason he woke up every day, the light that had brought meaning back into his life. The possibility of losing her was terrifying. "Do we have to tell her?" he asked. "Legally, yes. She has rights to the child. And does Violet remember this family? She was only 2 years old when she was kidnapped. It's possible she has some fragmented memories, but nothing clear." At that moment, Violet came running into the office, her hair disheveled from playing and her face flushed with joy. "Daddy, want to play hide and seek?" "Sure, princess," he replied automatically, but his voice sounded strange even to himself. Violet immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Why are you sad again?" "I'm not sad, just thinking about grown-up stuff. Bad stuff? I don't know yet." After Violet left to continue playing, the millionaire turned to the investigator. "I need to meet this woman before making any decisions." "I understand. I'll contact her. And don't say anything about having found Violet yet." I want to first understand what kind of person she is, whether she really loved the child, or if it was just a problematic adoption situation. Good idea. That night, after Violet fell asleep, the millionaire spent hours looking at old photographs of his wife, trying to understand why she had kept this investigation a secret. Among the papers, he found a letter she had started to write to him, but never finished. "My love," the letter read, "if you're reading this, it means something happened to me before I could tell you everything in person. There's a little girl who desperately needs to go home. Her real name is Eleanor, but she may not remember it. She was taken from a family that loves her deeply, and I'm determined to reunite them. If something happens to me, please complete this mission for me." The love of a real family is the most precious gift a child can receive. Tears streamed down the millionaire's face as he finished reading the letter. His wife had given her life trying to reunite Violet with her original family. Now he was in the position to complete that mission, even if it meant losing his own adopted daughter. The next day, the original foster mother arrived in town. She was a 35-year-old woman named Bethany, who had spent 2 years searching tirelessly for Eleanor. When the investigator showed her recent photographs of Violet, she burst into tears. "It's her! It's my Elena!" Bethany sobbed. "Where has she been all this time? How is she?" "She's doing well now," the investigator replied carefully, "but she's been through very difficult situations." "Can I see her?" "Please, can I see my daughter?" The millionaire, observing the scene through a one-way mirror in an adjacent room, felt his heart break. The genuine love and maternal despair in Bethany's voice were undeniable. Violet, Eleanor, had a real mother who had never stopped loving and searching for her. And now he would have to make the most difficult decision of his life, fight to keep the child who had become his daughter, or do the right thing and allow her to return to the arms of the one who truly had the right to love her. The story was heading towards its emotional climax, where true love would be tested in the most painful way possible. The first meeting between Bethany and Violet took place in a neutral room in the investigator's office, carefully prepared with toys and a welcoming environment to minimize the trauma of a recognition that might or might not happen. The millionaire was present, but maintained a respectful distance, observing every nuance of the interaction between the woman who claimed to be the real mother and the child he had learned to love as a daughter. Bethany entered the room with hesitant steps, her hands trembling visibly as her eyes searched for the girl she had lost 2 years ago. When she saw Violet playing quietly with building blocks, she stopped abruptly, covering her mouth with her hands to stifle a sob. Violet looked up, studying the unfamiliar woman with a child's natural curiosity. There was no immediate recognition, but there was also no fear. A significant change, considering how she reacted to strangers just a few months ago. "Hi," Violet said simply, continuing to stack her blocks. "Hi, sweetie," Bethany replied, correcting herself quickly. She knelt down at a safe distance, trying to control her emotions. "What a beautiful building you're making." "It's a castle," Violet explained. "For princesses who need to be safe." The reference to safety made Bethany exchange a worried glance with the millionaire. Even in an innocent play situation, the child's past trauma still showed. "Can I help you build it?" Bethany asked gently. Violet considered the request for a few moments, then pushed some blocks towards the woman. "You can make a tower, but it has to be strong to protect the princesses from the mean dragons." As they played together, Bethany began to softly sing a lullaby she used to sing to Elena before the kidnapping. It was a simple melody, a song she had created especially for her foster daughter. The effect on Violet was immediate and disturbing. She stopped playing, her eyes widening as an expression of confusion came over her face. "I know that song," she murmured. "You do?" Bethany asked, barely managing to control the hope in her voice. "Someone used to sing it to me when I was very little, before I got lost." Violet paused, a fragmented memory beginning to take shape in her young mind. "Are you the music lady?" Tears began to stream down Bethany's face. "It's me, my Elena. I'm your mommy who's been looking for you all this time." Violet looked confused between Bethany and the millionaire. "But he's my daddy now." "How can I have two mommies and two daddies?" The innocent question cut the hearts of all the adults present. The millionaire approached and knelt beside Violet. "Sometimes," he said gently, "families are more complicated than they seem. Bethany loved you very much when you were a baby, but bad people took you away from her. Like the bad people who hurt me. Similar people, yes." Violet processed this information with the seriousness of someone much older than her 4 years. "And now she wants to take me back?" Bethany leaned forward. "I never stopped looking for you, Elena. I never stopped loving you. Every day I thought about you and wished you were safe. But I am safe now," Violet replied. "Daddy protects me from the mean dragons." The situation was becoming emotionally unsustainable for everyone. The investigator intervened gently. "How about we give everyone some time to process this?" That night, after Violet fell asleep, Bethany and the millionaire met at a small private cafe to discuss the impossible situation they found themselves in. "She seems happy with you," Bethany admitted, stirring nervously in her cup of coffee. "Happier than I expected to find her after everything she's been through." "She's an extraordinary child," the millionaire replied. "Resilient, intelligent, brave, beyond anything I've ever seen. I remember that about her. Even when she was a baby, there was a special strength in her eyes." Bethany paused, studying the face of the man who had saved her daughter. "Can I ask why you did it? Why you risked so much for an unknown child?" The question touched the millionaire's soul. "Initially, I thought it was because of my wife. She had tried to save Violet and died for it. I felt it was my responsibility to complete her mission. And now I know it was because Violet brought life back into me. After I lost my wife, I was just existing. Violet taught me how to live again." Bethany was silent for a long time. "You love her, as if she were my biological daughter. I understand that feeling. That's exactly how I felt about her from the first day she came for adoption." Both remained silent, two adults who genuinely loved the same child, and now faced an impossible choice. "There's something you need to know," Bethany said finally. "When Eleanor disappeared, I blamed myself every day. The marriage couldn't withstand the pressure. My ex-husband said I was obsessive, that I needed to move on, but I couldn't." "What did you do during these 2 years?" "I spent all my savings hiring private investigators. I visited every shelter, every orphanage, every place where a lost child could be. I never gave up." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "But in recent months, I started to accept that maybe I would never see her again. And now that you've found her, now I feel lost. She doesn't remember me. You are her father figure. Taking her from you would be like traumatizing her again." The millionaire was surprised by Bethany's consideration. He had expected an immediate legal battle, demands for immediate restitution of the child. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe we could find a way for both of us to be part of her life. Like a non-traditional family?" "Exactly. She could have 2 homes. 2 families that love her. When she's older, she could choose where she wants to live permanently." The proposal was innovative and full of practical challenges, but it offered a solution that could preserve Violet's emotional well-being without depriving any adult of the right to love her. "And legally," the millionaire asked, "we can work with lawyers to create a shared custody arrangement. It wouldn't be traditional, but considering the extraordinary circumstances, Violet would have to agree. Of course, the final decision has to be hers." The next day, the 3 met again, this time in the garden of the mansion, where Violet felt most comfortable. She played with the dogs, while the 2 adults carefully explained the proposal of having 2 families. "Like at school," Violet said thoughtfully, "where some kids live with their mommy during the week and with their daddy on the weekend." "Something like that," Bethany agreed. "But would you both love me the same?" "The same," they both promised simultaneously. Violet was quiet for a few minutes, her mind processing the implications. Finally, she looked at the two adults with a seriousness that contrasted with her age. "Can I try it?" she asked. "To see if it works." It was a more mature and wise response than anyone had expected from a 4-year-old. But Violet had learned through hard experiences that things weren't always permanent, that important people could disappear, that she needed to be cautious with her feelings. "Of course you can try it," Bethany said, hugging her gently. "And if I don't like it, can I go back just to Daddy?" Violet asked, still needing guarantees of safety. "You'll always have a choice," the millionaire promised. Always. That afternoon, while Violet played happily knowing that she had gained one more person to love her instead of losing someone she already loved, Bethany and the millionaire began to plan a completely new kind of family. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and adjustments, but for the first time in 2 years, Bethany felt genuine hope, and the millionaire discovered that love doesn't diminish when it's divided. It multiplies. Violet had taught them all that family isn't about blood or legal documents, but about people who choose to love and protect a child, no matter how complicated the situation. 6 months after the start of the shared custody arrangement, Violet's life had found a balance that no one had predicted was possible. 3 days a week, she stayed with Bethany in a cozy house in the suburbs, and the other 4 days she spent at the mansion with the millionaire. Weekends alternated between the two families, and surprisingly, the routine worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Bethany had moved to a residence near the mansion, making the transitions easier for Violet and allowing the two adults to maintain constant communication about the child's well-being. What started as a situation of necessity had evolved into a genuine parental cooperation based on mutual love for Violet. That Tuesday morning, Violet was at Bethany's house, helping to make chocolate chip cookies, a tradition they had developed together. Her hair had grown and was now kept in 2 braids that Bethany did with maternal care every morning. "Mommy Bethany," Violet said, naturally using the term she had adopted to differentiate her from the millionaire, who remained simply Daddy. "Why were you sad yesterday when that man came to talk to you?" Bethany paused in the middle of mixing the dough. The man Violet was referring to was a lawyer who had brought disturbing news the previous afternoon. Violet's original biological family had been located. For months, parallel investigations conducted by legal authorities had traced the real origin of Violet. They discovered that she wasn't just Elena Rodriguez, the adopted child who had disappeared, but there was an even deeper layer to her story. Her original name was Isabella Santos, and she had been taken from her biological parents when she was only 2 years old, through a corrupt scheme that forged adoption documents. Her real parents, Maria and Carlos Santos, had spent the last 2 years desperately searching for her, believing that she'd been kidnapped during a walk in the park. "I'm not sad, sweetie," Bethany lied gently, "just thinking about grown-up stuff." Bad stuff? Complicated stuff. Violet had developed the ability to read between the lines of adult conversations, a capacity that had been forged by necessity during her most difficult periods. She knew that something important was being discussed, even if she didn't fully understand the details. "Are you going to have to give me away to other people again?" she asked directly, her voice small but brave. The question cut Bethany's heart like a knife. "Why do you ask that?" "Because it's always like that. When adults look worried and talk quietly, it means someone is going to take me away." Bethany put down the spoon and knelt beside Violet, holding her small hands carefully. "Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. Neither Daddy nor I will let anyone take you away if you don't want to go. We promise you that. Even if people show up who say they're my real family." The question demonstrated an understanding of the situation that was disturbing for a 4-year-old, But Bethany knew that Violet had been forced to mature prematurely due to the circumstances. Even then, Bethany promised, although she didn't know if she would be able to keep that promise. That afternoon, Bethany called the millionaire urgently. "We need to meet. There's been a development in Violet's legal situation." They met at a neutral cafe while Violet was at preschool. Bethany told him about the lawyer's visit and the discoveries about the girl's real identity. "The biological parents want to see her," Bethany said, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. "They have stronger legal rights than we do." The millionaire was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. "What are they like?" "According to the lawyer, they're simple, hard-working people. The father is a mechanic, the mother works in a store. They never stop looking for their daughter." Bethany paused. "They have 2 other children, Violet's siblings." "Siblings? A 6-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl." "Violet has a complete biological family that loves her and wants her back." The information hit both of them like an icy wave. Until now, they had been able to create an arrangement that worked because both were single adults, dedicating their lives entirely to Violet. But a complete family with siblings changed the whole dynamic. "What did the lawyer say about our rights?" the millionaire asked. "Legally, we have few rights against biological parents, especially considering that the original separation was through criminal activities." Bethany paused. "But he mentioned one possibility." "What?" "If we can prove that Violet would suffer significant psychological trauma being separated from us, a judge could consider a gradual transition period or even maintain some kind of visitation agreement." "And how do we prove that?" "Through the psychologists who are monitoring Violet. They can testify about the emotional progress she's made with us and the risks of an abrupt change." That night, the two met with Violet at the mansion for a conversation that neither of them wanted to have. "Princess," began the millionaire gently, "remember when Mommy Bethany showed up and we discovered you had 2 families who loved you?" "I remember." "Well, we've discovered that you may have an even bigger family than we thought." Violet frowned. "What do you mean?" Bethany joined the conversation. "You have a mommy and a daddy who gave birth to you, and they have other children. You have little brothers and sisters. Real siblings?" "Real." Violet was quiet for a long time, processing this complex information. "Do they know about me?" "They've always known about you and never stopped looking for you," the millionaire explained. "And they want to meet me." "Very much. Does that mean I'm going to have to live with them?" The question everyone feared had finally arrived. Bethany and the millionaire exchanged glances before answering. "Maybe," Bethany said honestly, "but not immediately. First you can meet them and see how you feel. And if I don't want to live with them, then we'll fight so that you can stay with us," the millionaire promised. "And if I want to meet my siblings, but still want to live with you, we'll try to find a way to make that work too." Violet got up from the chair and walked to the window, watching the garden where she had played happily in recent months. When she turned back to the 2 adults, her expression was serious beyond her years. "I want to meet my blood family," she said finally, "but you 2 are my heart family. And I don't want to choose between heart and blood." The wisdom of the child left both adults speechless. She had perfectly articulated the dilemma they all faced. 2 days later, the first meeting was arranged in a neutral public park. Maria and Carlos Santos arrived with their 2 children, Leo, 6 years old, and Lily, 2 years old. When they saw Violet for the first time in 2 years, both parents began to cry. "Isabella," Maria whispered, using her daughter's original name. Violet looked at them with curiosity, but without immediate recognition. However, when she saw Leo and Lily playing nearby, something sparked in her memory. "I know them," she said to Bethany, "from my dreams. I always dream of children playing with me." The meeting was emotionally charged but carefully supervised. Violet interacted naturally with her siblings, as if some familial instinct had awakened. But she remained close to Bethany and the millionaire, seeking the security she knew in them. When the meeting ended, Maria Santos approached Bethany. "She seems happy with you," she said, her voice laden with conflicting emotions. "She is our life," Bethany replied simply. "Ours too. For 2 years, not a day has gone by without us thinking of her." Therein lay the core of the conflict. 2 families that genuinely loved the same child, each with legitimate rights to claim her. What no one could predict was that Violet, in her childish wisdom, was about to propose a solution that would challenge all conventions about what constitutes a family. Violet's proposal came during a rainy afternoon, 3 weeks after the first meeting with her biological parents. She was sitting in the living room of the mansion, drawing in a large notebook that the millionaire had bought her, when she looked up and made a statement that would change the course of everything. "I know how to solve our problem," she said, putting her crayon down and looking directly at the millionaire and Bethany, who were discussing legal issues in hushed tones. "What problem, Princess?" asked the millionaire, sitting next to her on the colorful rug. "The problem of me having 2 families who love me and not knowing where to live." She showed her drawing, which depicted a very large house with many windows and smiling people in front. "We can all live together." Bethany approached, examining the drawing with growing interest. "Together how, honey?" "Like a big family. Daddy has a really big house. Mommy Bethany can live there too. And my blood parents and my siblings can come too." Violet paused, thinking about the logistics with the seriousness of an adult. "The house has lots of empty rooms anyway." The suggestion was both innocent and revolutionary. A completely unconventional extended family, united only by love for a child. "And you think everyone would agree to that?" Bethany asked gently. "Why wouldn't they agree? Everyone loves me, so everyone can be friends too." That night, after Violet fell asleep, Bethany and the millionaire talked seriously about the girl's proposal. As unlikely as it seemed, there was solid emotional logic behind the idea. "She's right about the house," the millionaire said. "There's more than enough room. The entire West Wing has been empty for years. But would you really consider that, turning your mansion into a kind of family compound? If it's what Violet needs to be happy, I'd consider anything." "And the biological parents? Would they agree to live on a property that isn't theirs, depending economically on you?" "I can offer Carlos a job at my company. He's a mechanic, and we always need qualified people to maintain the vehicle fleet. Maria could help with the domestic management of the property if she wanted to work." Bethany was impressed by how quickly he had thought of practical solutions. "Would you really do that?" "Bethany, in recent months I've learned that family isn't about tradition or social conventions. It's about people who choose each other and make sacrifices to protect those they love." He paused, looking towards the room where Violet was sleeping. "If this extraordinary child can imagine a solution where everyone wins, who are we to say it's impossible?" The next day, they presented the idea to Maria and Carlos Santos during a meeting in the park. The initial reaction was shock and disbelief. "You're suggesting that we live in your house?" Maria asked, clearly confused. "I'm suggesting that we create a non-traditional family where Isabella, Violet, can have access to everyone who loves her without having to give up anyone," the millionaire replied. Carlos, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Why would you do this for us? We're practically strangers." "Because you are the parents of the most important child in my life. That makes us family, whether we like it or not." Bethany added, "We know it's strange, that it's not conventional. But Violet has been through enough trauma. If we can avoid traumatizing her further by forcing her to choose between the people she loves, shouldn't we try?" Maria looked at her 2 children playing with Violet on the playground. Leo had become an instant protector of his older sister, and Lily followed her everywhere like a loyal puppy. The connection between the siblings was evident and natural. What about the practical aspects? Maria asked. Work, school for the children, financial independence. I've already thought about that, the millionaire replied. Carlos can work at my company with a market salary. You can choose to work or dedicate yourself fully to the children as you prefer. The children can study at the private school near the property, which has an excellent reputation. And our dignity? We don't want to live on charity. It wouldn't be charity. It would be a partnership. You would contribute with parental presence. I would contribute with resources. Everyone would win. Carlos exchanged a long look with his wife. Can I ask one thing? Of course. Why did you lose your wife? Violet mentioned that the sandwich lady wasn't here anymore. The millionaire took a deep breath. My wife was murdered by the same criminal network that kidnapped Violet. She died trying to save your daughter. The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. Maria covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. She died trying to return our daughter to us, she whispered. She died trying to do the right thing, just like I'm trying to do now. Carlos stood up and walked a few steps, clearly struggling with complex emotions. When he turned back, there was determination on his face. If we do this, it will be with some conditions. What? First, we are not your employees. We are partners in this strange family we are creating. Second, we contribute what we can: work, childcare, household maintenance. Third, if it doesn't work, we can leave at any time without drama. I agree with everything. Maria joined her husband. And one condition from me: Violet remains Violet. She can know that her original name was Isabella, but we won't force her to change back if she doesn't want to. Why not? Bethany asked, surprised. Because Violet is who she became after surviving hell. Isabella was an innocent child who was taken from us. Violet is a warrior who fought to come back to life. Both are our daughters, but she must choose who she wants to be. The wisdom and love behind the decision impressed everyone present. A week later, changes were being made to the mansion. The West Wing was renovated to accommodate the Santos family, with individual rooms for each child and a common space where they could have privacy when needed. Bethany decided to keep her house as a personal refuge, but she began to have dinner at the mansion every night and to actively participate in the family routine. The first night that the entire extended family slept under the same roof was strange, but surprisingly harmonious. Violet ran from room to room, checking if everyone was comfortable, taking on the role of hostess of the family gathering she had orchestrated. "Is everyone happy?" she asked during dinner, looking around the large table where 8 people shared a meal. "We're trying to figure out how to be happy together," Carlos replied honestly. "Just choose to be happy," Violet said simply. "Like I chose you to be my family." That night, after all the children fell asleep, the 4 adults gathered on the mansion's porch to talk about the future. "Can this really work?" Maria asked. "I don't know," the millionaire admitted, "but it's worth trying." "For Violet," Bethany said. "For Violet," they all agreed. What none of them could imagine was that they were creating something much larger than a solution to a custody problem. They were establishing a new type of family that would serve as an example for other children in similar situations. But there was still one last secret to be revealed, a truth that would forever change their understanding of why fate had brought all these people together in such unexpected ways. The story was heading towards its end, but the most surprising revelation was yet to come. 6 months had passed since the unconventional family settled in the mansion, and life had found a surprisingly harmonious rhythm. Violet was flourishing in ways that impressed even the psychologists who continued to monitor her development. She had grown physically and emotionally. Her hair was longer and shinier. Her laughter echoed through the halls of the mansion daily, and most importantly, she had completely stopped having nightmares. Carlos had adapted perfectly to the job at the millionaire's company, his experience as a mechanic being valued by the maintenance team. Maria had chosen to dedicate herself to the children and household management, discovering that she had a natural talent for organizing such a large and complex home. Bethany remained an integral part of the family, sharing parenting responsibilities and offering valuable perspectives on Violet's education. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the final revelation came in a completely unexpected way. Violet was playing in the garden with Leo and Lily when she found a box buried near the large tree where she used to read her favorite books. "Daddy, Mommy Bethany, Mommy Maria, Dad Carlos," she shouted, using the combination of titles she had developed naturally for each adult. "I found a treasure." The four adults ran to the garden, where Violet was holding a small rusty metal box that had clearly been buried for a long time. "Where did you find that, Princess?" asked the millionaire, kneeling next to her. "I was digging here to plant a flower for the sandwich lady, like you taught me. Then I found this little box." The millionaire felt his heart race. His wife used to spend hours in that particular part of the garden, and he had always wondered why. "Can I open it?" Violet asked, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Let's open it together." Inside the box were a sealed letter, several photographs, and a small gold locket. The millionaire immediately recognized his wife's delicate handwriting on the envelope, which was marked with, "For when all the pieces of the puzzle fit together." With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began to read aloud. "My love, if you are reading this letter, it means that you have managed to find Isabella and bring together all the people she needs in her life. There is something you need to know about why I dedicated myself so much to saving this specific child. Isabella is not just a random child that I tried to help. 2 years ago, when I started my volunteer work, I discovered through old adoption records that I had a younger sister. A sister that my biological parents were forced to give up for adoption when I was too young to remember. I spent months investigating and finally found her. She had married a wonderful man named Carlos Santos and had 2 children, Leo and a little girl named Isabella. Isabella is my niece, my love. She's blood family, the only biological family I had left in the world. When I discovered that she had been kidnapped by the criminal network, it wasn't just compassion for an unknown child that motivated me. It was love for my own family. Maria Santos is my younger sister. When I die, because I know I am taking risks by investigating this network, Isabella will be an orphan of an aunt, but not an orphan of love if you complete my mission. Reuniting Isabella with Maria is not just reuniting a child with her mother. It is reuniting our extended family. Maria is your sister-in-law, darling. Leo and Lily are your nephews and niece. And Isabella is our niece, the daughter we could never have, but that destiny put in our lives in another way. In the locket are old photographs of me and Maria when we were children. Show it to her. I'm sure she'll remember the older sister who used to play with her before the separation. I love you eternally, and I know that you will give our extended family all the love that I could not give personally." When the millionaire finished reading, an absolute silence fell over the garden. Maria was pale, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Let me see the locket," she whispered. Inside the locket were 2 small photographs, a girl of approximately 8 years old, with dark hair and gentle eyes, and a younger child, perhaps 3 years old, with clearly similar features. "My God," murmured Maria, falling to her knees. "Elena, my sister Elena. I remember her. Elena was my wife's name," the millionaire said, his voice choked with emotion. "She used to call me her little one, and promised she'd come back for me one day," Maria continued, sobbing. "But our parents said she had gone to a better family and that I would never see her again." Violet, who had remained quiet throughout the revelation, suddenly understood the magnitude of what was happening. "The sandwich lady was your sister, Mummy Maria?" "She was, my daughter, and she died trying to reunite us." Bethany, who was also crying, approached Violet. Do you know what this means, honey? Violet thought for a moment, her 5-year-old mind processing the complex connections. It means we're all real family, not just heart family, but blood too? Exactly that, replied the millionaire, hugging her. Then the sandwich lady got what she wanted, Violet said with surprising wisdom. She wanted us all to be a family, and now we are. In those following moments, an extraordinary transformation took place. What had begun as a practical arrangement to meet the needs of a traumatized child revealed itself as the fulfillment of a larger plan, orchestrated by a woman who had given her life to reunite people who didn't even know they were family. Carlos hugged the millionaire. "You're my brother-in-law," he said, still processing the revelation. "And you're the brother I never had," replied the millionaire. Maria and Bethany hugged each other, realizing that they now shared not only the care of Violet, but a true family connection through the memory of Elena. "Now, can we put a picture of the sandwich lady in the living room?" Violet asked. "So she can see that we managed to be a big, happy family?" "We can, Princess." That night, while the children slept and the adults processed the day's revelations, the millionaire found peace at last. His wife had not only saved a child, she had reunited an entire family that didn't even know it was separated. Violet, the girl he had found being abused on a street, was actually his niece. The family he had invited to live in his house were his true relatives. Bethany, who had become a second mother to Violet, was now officially part of an extended family that transcended conventional definitions. A year later, on the anniversary of the discovery of the buried box, the entire family gathered in the garden for a special ceremony. They planted a rose bush on the spot where the box had been found, and Violet placed a small plaque that she had made at school. "For Aunt Eleanor, who taught us that love always finds a way." Violet, now 6 years old, was starting the first grade in a school where she was known as the child with the most interesting family in town. 4 parents who loved her unconditionally, 2 siblings who protected her, and a story of overcoming adversity that inspired everyone who knew her. Her physical scars had disappeared completely, but more importantly, her emotional scars had turned into strength. She spoke openly about before, when I was lost, and after, when I found my big family, without trauma or bitterness, only with gratitude for the journey that had led her to the place where she belonged. The millionaire had established a foundation in his wife's name, dedicated to reuniting lost children with their families and to combating child exploitation networks. Bethany had become the director of the foundation, using her personal experience to help other families in similar situations. Maria and Carlos had become active advocates for non-conventional families, sharing their story at conferences and workshops on adoption and alternative family care. And Violet had become exactly what her Aunt Elena had envisioned, a child loved, protected, and surrounded by people who would do anything for her happiness. On quiet nights, when the whole house was at peace, the millionaire sometimes walked through the garden and whispered "thank you" to the rose bush that marked the spot where destiny had revealed its final plan. Love had truly found a way, reuniting not only a child with her family, but connecting souls who didn't even know they were destined to be one family. And so, the girl who had once been just a wounded little bird became the heart of an extraordinary family, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest places and end with more love than anyone dared to dream. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you daily videos that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.